Well, thank you all for coming, and it's nice to see you all. 20 years ago, the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese in Los Angeles asked me to come and give a talk to the diocesan convention. The Episcopal Church was wrestling with the issue of whether to accept and in some sense endorse transgender people. Now, they knew that their ministry was to all people and we're all made in God's image, but they wanted to know just who was going to be coming in the door. And they had had no encounter with transgender people. They didn't know any of them. And that was about the time that my book, Evolution's Rainbow, came out. And the book has 3 parts to it. The first is about gender and sexuality in the animal kingdom. And the second is about development and physiology. And the third part is about the comparative anthropology of gender and sexuality in different cultures and through history. And so I put together a little talk about the third part of the book, about the comparative anthropology of gender and sexuality. Now, the purpose of this was not to explain what trans is all about, but just to acquaint people with who they were and just see pictures of people, human beings, who might be coming through the door someday. And so it seems like that's still timely here 20 years later. And so I've reached back to find a lot of the slides from that time and put that together with you so that you could see and get a better idea of who the trans people are in this world. Now, I'll go through different cultures. And one other thing is that I'm not an anthropologist. I'm a biologist, a zoologist. And so I'll be quoting from anthropologists. This is not my primary research, it's their primary research, and so I'll be quoting from them. And one of the first cases closest to home are the people called Two Spirits in North America. And I quote from Walter Williams in his 1968 book, The Spirit and the Flesh, Sexual Diversity in American Indian Culture. And the left panel on the slide is a 1900 photograph of Oshtish, a well-known male-bodied two-spirit person from the Crow Nation in the present-day Wyoming Dakotas, who lived as a woman. And the right panel is an 1890s photograph of a female-bodied two-spirit person from the Quechuan area of northwestern South America who lived as a man and specifically a warrior. This warrior, dressed in male clothing, presents in a confident, almost jaunty manner with no attempt to cover or bind the breasts. And the middle panel is a painting of another female-bodied warrior from the Plains Indians between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. Now, among the Mojave tribes along the Colorado River in the American Southwest, Williams writes about how parents deal with a boy who has a predisposition to be two-spirited. When the child is about 10 years old, his relatives begin discussing his predispositions. The relatives then prepare a ceremony without letting the boy know about it. The ceremony is meant to take him by surprise and to serve as both an initiation and a test of his true inclinations. People from various settlements attend. The family wants the community to see it. The boy is led into a circle. If he remains there, he accepts that he will go through the ceremony. A singer sings songs, and if the songs move him, the boy, he will dance as women do and dance with intensity. If the boy dances as a woman for 4 songs, his status as a two-spirit is confirmed. Then he is taken by the women, bathed, receives a skirt, and returns to the crowd and announces his new feminine name. And among the Tohono O'odham Indians of the Sonoran Desert in the American Southwest, the ceremony also involves a public test of inclination. At a social gathering of friends and family, a small bush enclosure is built, and a man's bow and arrows and a woman's basket are placed inside this structure. The boy is then brought into the enclosure. As the adults watch, he is told to enter the enclosure. The adults set fire to the enclosure. The boy has time to take only one of 2 items. If he takes the basket while leaving the bow and the arrow, he is confirmed as a two-spirit. And the slide illustrates yet another dance involving a two-spirit person. This from the Sac and Fox Nation of Indians in the Oklahoma, Missouri, Mississippi, Kansas, and Nebraska of the American Southern Midwest. Now, another large culture concerns historically the eunuchs in the Hebrew Bible. The top left panel on the slide shows an icon of a gender variant Christian that I photographed at an old church during a visit to Ethiopia in 2009. The right panel shows another icon of a gender variant Christian that I photographed on a cave wall in Cappadocia during a visit to Turkey in 2008. The lower left panel shows a reproduction of the cave wall painting that appears as a decoration in a shop selling souvenirs to tourists. Both the Hebrew and Christian testaments offer generous and explicit reference to eunuchs, and the progression of these references is from rejection to acceptance to welcome. A passage from Deuteronomy rejects the eunuchs. No man whose testicles are crushed or whose penis is cut off can belong to the Lord's assembly. But this sentiment is then reversed by the prophet Isaiah, who says, "Don't let the eunuch say, 'I am just a dry tree.' The Lord says, 'To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, choose what I desire, and remain loyal to my covenant. In my temple and courts, I will give them a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give to them an enduring name that won't be removed. My house will be known as a house of prayer for all peoples, says the Lord God, who gathers Israel's outcasts. I will gather still others to those I have already gathered." Unquote. And I quote now from the historian Matthew Keffler in his 2001 book, The Manly Eunuch: Masculinity, Gender Ambiguity, and Christian Ideology in Late Antiquity, about the various occupations of eunuchs in the Roman Empire. Many eunuchs were slaves, bought and sold in a slave market. Their roles ran the gamut from serving as domestic servants all the way to serving in the royal administrations of ancient Greek kingdoms in the Eastern Mediterranean. Keffler quotes original sources that disparagingly describe eunuchs who, quote, "feminized their faces, rubbed smooth their skin, and disgraced their manly sex by donning women's regalia. They nurse their tresses and pretty them up woman fashion. They dress in soft garments. They can hardly hold their heads erect on their languid necks. Next, being thus divorced from masculinity, they get intoxicated with the music of flutes." Sources state that such eunuchs renounced their previous masculine identities and called one another girls in private. Some eunuchs were evidently marrying as women, prompting a ruling to outlaw this practice. In 342, the Christian emperors Constantinus II and Constans imposed the death penalty, quote, when a man married in the manner of a woman, as a woman, to offer herself to men. However, the appearance of eunuchs varied considerably, depending in part on the age at which their testicles were removed. Some eunuchs tended to look more androgynously boyish rather than exaggeratedly feminine. One of the most conspicuous occupations for free eunuchs was as priestesses to a goddess called the Mother of Gods, Cybele. Cybele was believed to control both agriculture and human fertility, including their underlying passions. The Cybelean priestesses were a stable and long-lasting transgender group. In 1999, archaeologists showed that a male-bodied person from Yorkshire, England, who was buried in female clothes and jewelry, was the remains of a 4th century Cybelean priestess. The religion was well established in the north of England. Hadrian's Wall at Corbridge contains an altar dedicated to Cybele. The left panel of the slide shows a reconstruction of the Yorkshire town where the Cybelean altar was found. The left bottom panel shows feminine bracelets worn by the male-bodied person found there, and the right panel shows an artist's depiction of the apparel worn by a priestess. Cybelean priestesses had religious rites for performing a kind of sex reassignment surgery. These took place each year in the spring on March 24th. With a sickle, several candidate priestesses severed their genitals in, quote, an ecstatic frenzy. The ceremony used ornamented clamps, one of which was found in the Thames by London Bridge and is now in the British Museum. After the operation, the Cybelean priestess adopts woman's clothing, including wearing a veil and jewelry and growing long hair. Now, one would expect from the hostility from the early Christians to the Cybelean priestesses. After all, Cybele worship was a rival religion to Christianity. Yet the Bible itself takes a very different approach. In Matthew, Jesus himself weighs in with an appreciative explanation of who the eunuchs are. The lower panel of the slide quotes Jesus in the Bible saying, quote, "For there are eunuchs who have been eunuchs from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by other people, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs because of the kingdom of heaven. Those who can accept it should accept it." And in Acts, the evangelist Philip puts Jesus' teaching into practice. Philip baptizes a eunuch into the Christian church. The Bible passage from Acts appears in the slide. According to the passage, Philip has gone to the city of Samaria to preach. Then an angel of the Lord spoke to Philip, quote, "At noon, take the road that leads from Jerusalem to Gaza." This is a desert road. So he did. Meanwhile, an Ethiopian man was on his way home from Jerusalem, where he had come to worship. He was a eunuch and an official responsible for the entire treasury of Candace. Candace is the title given to the Ethiopian queen. He was reading the prophet Isaiah while sitting in his carriage, and the Spirit told Philip, "Approach this carriage and stay with it." The eunuch invited Philip to come up and sit with him. And as they went down the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, water, what would keep me from being baptized?" And Philip said to him, "If you believe with all your heart, you can be." And the eunuch answered, "I believe that Jesus Christ is God's Son." He ordered that the carriage halt. Both Philip and the eunuch went down to the water where Philip baptized him. This baptism welcomes not only a eunuch to the church, but a black-skinned foreigner as well. And the foreigner was possibly also a slave. Now, reflect for a moment on this event. How would Philip know that the person in the chariot was a eunuch? The person had to be somehow conspicuously different from ordinary men. Though recognizably male, the person would also have to be recognizably feminine to some degree. Otherwise, Philip wouldn't know the person was a eunuch. Reflect, too, on the condition Philip stipulated for membership in the church. One solely must believe in Jesus as God's Son. Notice the absence of any additional requirements. No need to dress and present as a man. No need to avoid sexual relations with men or women. No need to use special bathrooms. Just believe in Jesus as the Son of God, that's all. And no limit on participation. No stipulation that the eunuch must remain only a worshiper, but not become a disciple. No stipulation that the eunuch could not baptize others and welcome them into the church. Or to use today's language, no limit on serving in church leadership in ecclesiastical or lay capacities, in addition to participating in ordinary worship. You see where I'm coming from. The slide also shows the only depiction where I could find the eunuch showing somewhat feminine features, although the eunuch's skin tone does not seem dark enough to represent an Ethiopian from Nubia. These passages are not ambiguous one-liners inviting misappropriation. Instead, these passages are clear, direct, and extensive. Nor in the Bible's writings are eunuchs ever attended by a hint of moral approbation. Thus, both the Hebrew and Christian testaments instruct, indeed command, full inclusion of gender-diverse people in all roles within Christian communities of worship. Now, the third example, Joan of Arc in the European Middle Ages. I quote now from the late transgender activist Leslie Feinberg in the 1996 book, Transgender Warriors. And she demonstrated how Joan of Arc was burned at the cross actually for what today we would consider as behavior typical of a committed transgender man. Joan of Arc was born in Lorraine, France, around 1412. At the age of 17, Joan, dressed in man's clothing, along with a group of followers, approached the heir to the French throne, Prince Charles, and offered to forge an army of peasants to drive out the English. Charles agreed and authorized Joan's command of 10,000-strong peasant army, and Joan defeated the English later that year in 1429. As Charles was coronated, Joan stood beside him with a combat banner as illustrated in the slide. But a year later, Joan was captured by the Burgundians, who in turn sold Joan to the English. The King of England, Henry VI, wrote to the leader of the Catholic Inquisition that, quote, a woman calling herself Joan the Maid, leaving off the dress and clothing of the feminine sex, a thing contrary to divine law and abominable before God and forbidden by all laws, wore clothing and armor such as is worn by men. Joan was then charged, as stated verbatim in the court proceedings, quote, you have said that, by God's command, you have continually worn man's dress, your hair cut short, cut and round about your ears, with nothing left to show you are a woman, and that on many occasions you received the body of the Lord dressed in this fashion. And you have said that not for anything would you take an oath not to wear this clothing. Therefore, the court concluded that, quote, you condemn yourself in being unwilling to wear the customary clothing of your sex, unquote. Thus, Joan of Arc was sentenced to die and was burned alive at the stake in 1431 at the age of 19. After Joan's clothing had burned off, Joan was presumed dead, the inquisitors raked back the coals to show the naked body, revealing, quote, all the secrets that belong to a woman, to take away any doubts from people's minds. Joan of Arc must have been convincingly masculine to require such extraordinary measures. Nonetheless, paintings of Joan of Arc typically attempt to feminize Joan's appearance. The most famous depiction of Joan of Arc is by Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, painted in 1854, over 400 years after Joan's death. The oil painting hangs in the Louvre in Paris, France, and appears on the left panel of the slide. Joan is depicted with a woman's skirt, which she never wore, and with long hair. One of Ingres' students in 1855 apparently felt his teacher's depiction was so inaccurate that he redid the painting, with the skirt removed, as shown in the right panel of the slide. The student's revised picture hangs in the Museum of Fine Arts in Orleans, France. Now, moving into the present, here's an example of contemporary Hijra in India. In 2006, I was invited to give a plenary talk to a conference in New Delhi sponsored by UN AIDS and organized by the distinguished Shivanandra Khan of the Naz Foundation. The objective of the conference was to bring HIV and AIDS care providers from South Asia countries. I was speaking as a biologist about gender and sexuality in nature. I agreed to come if I could meet and interview some members from a large group of over 1 million trans people known as Hijra. The Hijra form both a caste and a religious sect. The word Hijra was translated by the colonial British as eunuch, reflecting the Hijra use of an indigenous sex reassignment surgery called the Nirvan. Hijra religion, especially in northern India, focuses on devotion to a mother goddess, Mata. The religion is principally Hindu with some elements of Islam. After the conference, I was taken to shanty towns, including the one shown in the slide. And here's a picture on the right, of a person who has had Nirvan. And on the left, a Hijra woman with her husband. Now, as a caste, Hijra performs celebrations at the birth of a male child. This is what they do. And at weddings, they offer blessings of Mata and earn money in this way. With the westernization of India, the demand for these ceremonies is declining, and Hijras increasingly work in the sex trade or in begging. This slide shows a group of Hijra sex workers that I met, and the audio clip, which I'll now play, is characteristic music that Hijra play at a celebration. And people from India will recognize this tune right away. Okay, and I quote now from Serena Nanda in her 1999 book, The Hijras of India. The Hijras are organized nationally into 7 named houses, An elder from each house, called a nayak, has jurisdiction over a geographic region, such as a medium-sized city or section of a large city. The nayaks meet collectively as a jamat, or meeting of the elders, and function as a ruling board of the region. The jamat formally approves the admission of a candidate to the Hijras. A candidate Hijra is called a chela, or disciple, and is sponsored by or apprenticed to a guru, or teacher. The slide shows a guru in a white sari with a chela on her left side. I am sitting to her right side. To join the Hijras, a candidate is taken under the wing of a guru, who then brings her to the jamat for induction. The chela gives the guru her earnings and submits to her authority. The guru is responsible for the welfare of her chela and for the initiation fees paid to the jamat. A guru usually lives with her chelas in a small commune, typically 5 or so. Occasionally, a Hijra marries and lives with her husband. The guru's husband is sitting next to me on my right. And these are some other Hijra who were attending the conference. And I just simply took pictures of them. And the one from the right is from New Zealand. One from the left, I believe, is from Thailand. And throughout Southeast Asia, there are lots of trans people. And while at the conference, I met representatives from many countries in South Asia and the Pacific. This slide shows transgender people from various countries, including Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesian, along with me, stuck in there. Now, contemporary people, transgender people in Polynesia. Transgender people occur throughout Oceania. The panel on the left is a transgender woman from Guam who was attending the conference. The panel on the right shows transgender people from Hawaii called Mahu that I met on a different occasion also in 2006. Mahu occur throughout Polynesia and are especially prominent in Tahiti. And here's some other Mahu here. This is at a big party. And now moving to more to the present, contemporary transgender people in North America, murder. The left panel illustrates a 17-year-old transgender girl, Gwen Arahu, who was killed in early October 2002 and whose body was dumped near the Sierra Nevada mountains. And the right panel on the slide shows Brandon Tina, a young trans man raped and murdered in Nebraska when he was discovered to be transgender. And then, this, as I said, this was about 20 years ago. I worked with some famous transgender activists of that time. The left panel shows Lynn Conway, a distinguished electrical engineer at the University of Michigan. And the right panel shows Jameson Green, author of the 2004 book, Becoming a Visible Man. And so here's a partial list of the trans cultures around the world, and I know it's partial. As you can see, it's Two Spirits, Mahu, Mexico, South Asia, Samoa, Thailand, two in Indonesia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Oman, Albania, and of course I've showed you Greek and Rome, and there are also early Islamic societies. And I know this is incomplete because I'm also aware of transgender cultures in the Balkans and in China. And so, this is here. So the question I know that many people also have is how do trans people develop? And so I'm going to show you two slides right here about development. So this is a little video, a little illustration of embryonic development that was prepared by the University of Pennsylvania about 20 years ago. So the other day I took it and upscaled it with today's technology so that it reads okay. So this is going to run 45 seconds. So the first 15 seconds is the first trimester, the next 15 seconds is the second trimester, and then there's the third trimester, okay? So we could time it here. So this is the first trimester. See that we have implantation there. Okay, now we're starting the second trimester. And that little blurb to the right, that little white to the right is the embryo. And the orange and the yellow in the middle is the yolk sac. And then the baby starts to grow. The fetus starts to grow. You see the umbilical cord. And finally, the head's growing. And so now we're in the third trimester. I can go back to show you this at a time, but the reason I'm showing you this at all is because of the following article and articles like this. This is called Sexual Differentiation of the Human Brain in Relation to Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation. And this is, the authors are Savek, Garcia, Falgueras, and Dick Schwab. And Dick Schwab is the real key player in this. He's in Holland. He's done a lot of research on this. And I've put here in yellow the important parts from the abstract here. Sexual differentiation of the genitals takes place in the first 2 months of pregnancy. 2 months. And sexual differentiation of the brain starts in the second half of pregnancy. And these two processes can be influenced independently and may result in transsexuality. There is no proof that social environment after birth has an effect on gender identity or sexual orientation. And to what extent fetal programming determines sexual orientation is a matter of discussion, so it's not so clear. And neuronal circuits involving the hypothalamus is the locus of this. So the point is that you have the formation of the genitals in the first trimester, and then you have the development of the brain in the second and third trimester. Now, the presence of testosterone is key to how the development proceeds. If there's no testosterone present at the beginning, the genitals develop in a feminine direction, turn into a clitoris and uterus and so forth. If there is testosterone present, then the primitive phallus turns into a penis, and the urethra migrates and is located in the center of the penis. So the presence or absence of testosterone at the beginning determines whether the genital structure becomes male or female. But the same thing is also true later on. That in the absence of testosterone, the brain has a feminine geometry to it, and in the presence of testosterone, it becomes masculine. So there's 9 months difference between this beginning and the end, and that's more than enough time for a lot of things to change, the hormonal situation to change. And so I did a review on this topic. Now, I'm not an endocrinologist and I'm not a neurobiologist. So that's why I'm quoting the paper right here. So far as I can tell from the review that I did about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, the story is increasingly substantiated with respect to transsexuality, that it's a different hormonal regime in the beginning and in the end. However, the evidence for this kind of theory for sexual orientation is really weak, and it would look like sexual orientation forms after birth. In any case, it would logically have to form after gender identity formed, because you need to have a notion of gender in order to have same gender attraction. Because if there's no gender defined, then you couldn't even have that. So it seems like my take on it was about 1 to 3 years or so after birth. But that's, reading the tea leaves. In any case, as you can see then, transgender people are a property of the human species. I mean, everywhere throughout history, across the whole world, there are trans people everywhere. They're not in huge minorities. They're maybe 10%, 5% in just about all cultures. Each culture deals with it differently. So there are different cultural forms which package, if you will, trans people, or let them blend. And some cultures feature, wonder what's going on there. And some cultures, in some cultures, gender identity is realized through some kind of surgical procedure. That would be true for India. That was true in ancient Greece, and that's true for the Indo-European cultures, of which we are one. But for other cultures, your gender identity is established by your occupation. Do you have a basket? Did you go for a basket? Do you want to do weaving? Are you a warrior? And you don't cover up your genitals. It's the occupation that you're in. You saw the pictures of the two-spirited women, female-bodied people, riding horses, being warriors, accepted as warriors, dressed as warriors, being jaunty about it. They weren't covering their breasts. And so it seems as though the major dichotomy across cultures is whether gender identity is expressed through genital morphology versus whether it's expressed through occupation. In any case, the reason they're going to be transgender people, have been forever and will be in the future, is that you can't count on the hormonal regime during embryonic development to stay constant. All it has to do is vary for one reason or another, and that winds up producing gender diversity. That begs the evolutionary question, though, as to why this is adaptive, but that's another matter. Evolution's rainbow is now translated into Spanish, Portuguese, and Korean, and the successor book, The Genial Gene, is also translated into French. The bishop at the end of this, giving basically this talk, except for the last 2 slides, came to me and he said, "Okay, I get it." Yeah. And just seeing the people was sufficient. And I was very taken by that. Yeah, Richard.
Joan, thank you very much. I understand there are some societies, or maybe a more neutral term would be geographic locations, in which gender change occurs naturally at puberty. Typically where the girls, the person who is seemingly a girl, then has her testicles drop,
Yeah.
and then becomes a boy and is treated as such. Is that a common phenomenon,
No.
or is it only in certain parts of the world?
There's only one place where I know that occurs, and I believe it's in the Dominican Republic, called Guava Doce, and so the person is classified as a female to begin with, and then lo and behold, at puberty, testicles descend, and so then the person obviously becomes male in gender, and but I don't know of another case for that, and it looks to me like it's a case of sort of island singularity, where you often find on islands there will be a unique gene that becomes widespread in a local area. Oftentimes hair color, for example, will be unique to one little area. And does occur in this one spot in the Dominican Republic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question? Like,
How does all this relate to the XY, XX chromosome?
Well, that's a complicated question in the sense as whether sex determination is due to XX and XY generally, and it isn't. So, for example, in birds, birds don't have an XXXY system of sex determination. In many reptiles, sex determination occurs, but it's determined by the temperature at which the egg is reared. So, in principle, if you were a lizard, you could lay it in the cold and get one sex to your offspring. You could lay your eggs in the heat and get a different sex. So it's all over the map as to how sex is determined, whether it's by chromosome or not. And if it is by chromosome, by what arrangement of chromosomes. Now, and even in mammals, and see, that's invertebrates. Invertebrates, it's all over the map. But even in mammals, there still were some rodents. I remember in Evolution's Rainbow finding some rodents in which the XY system didn't work. But in humans, the XY system is supposed to classify. Now, but the XY, you want to ask what gene is on the X and what gene is on the Y. There's a certain gene called the SRY, the sex determining region on the Y chromosome, which is kind of the boss gene and tends to determine what sex it is. So if the SRY gene causes the formation of testosterone, then, and if its production of testosterone is continuous throughout all 9 months, then you'd get, you might say, your quintessential male or your characteristic male. But the problem is that for every hormone needs a receptor in order to work. So if testosterone is just sitting out there in surrounding your cell, it doesn't do anything. Your cell has to have a protein on it that binds to the testosterone and, so to speak, guides it through the cell wall into the interior. Now, many people with Y chromosomes don't have the receptor. And so this leads to something called androgen insensitivity, which is a form of intersex. And intersex is a grab-all term for any kind of departure from this very linear picture of testosterone leading to this, leading to this, leading to this, and so. And there are converses of this too. There's so someone with androgen insensitivity will have a Y chromosome and will look perfectly female. And I remember a book, back when I was doing this 20 years ago, I remember going to a talk by someone named Thea Hillman who wrote a book about this, and she was androgen insensitive. And all the different, within the intersex community, it's a very heterogeneous community because there are all different kinds of ways you can be intersex, because there are all different ways in which this whole system can go in different directions. So each one had their own support group. So the androgen insensitivity people had their group. And then there was a small number of people who would have, say, 2 X's and 1 Y, which is another characteristic type of intersex. And I think it's that around 1 to 2 to 3% of the population is intersex in one way or another. One of the most common ones is called, I think it's called hypospadia or something like that, where the urethra in the penis doesn't vent all the way at the end, but vents down in the middle, and that's when the urethra doesn't continue to develop to completion and vent at the end. So that would be called a kind of intersex. But such a person would be male from a gender point of view completely. And so the Y thing needs to be de-emphasized. And it certainly is a big player in the overall determination of gender. That your shape, your body shape, how you behave, and so on, that's evolutionarily constructed. That's still constructed. It's just not through social means, but it's through survival and reproduction in nature. So now, if you look at a medical textbook or so on, they typically have this table of properties of males and properties of females, and they would then say that a male has to have a this and a this and a this and a this, and so they have a whole table of it, and a female has a this and a this and this and this, and biologists would have a hard time defending that, because these are all secondary characteristics, and so I think from our point of view, we'd like to have it all lumped into gender, and there's morphological gender, there's behavioral gender, there's so on. Does that answer your question? I hope. Sorry, Leif. You get me going, what can I say?
My husband, who asked the last question, which was
I know
simple to answer, he was in Peace Corps in Tonga, in the island of Tonga, and the same term, the Samoan term, whāwhine, is used there. From what Leif has told me, it was a completely accepted thing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, in how many of those countries in which you had that list of 14 or so, I think, is it not a big deal like it is here in the U.S.? I mean, the Hijra sound like millions, a million people.
Oh yeah, a whole lot, a huge number.
So,
they have big national conferences and
so
things.
are they outcasts by some definition in India, or are they accepted? And I guess I'm just wondering, are we the only country that doesn't accept trans?
No, it's all over the map. Even among the Indian nations, some of the Indian nations, the ones I quoted, are have multiple genders. The thing I like about the word two-spirit is that it's a very positive term. You have a bit of masculine and a bit of feminine. And in some of the Indian nations, such people became shamans and had an honorary role. Now, the thing I don't like about the translation of Hijra is neither man nor woman. So it winds up being negative there. And so, of course, because it's part of the biological species, you wind up having these millions of, and India having so many people, would even 1 or 2 or 10 or 5% of the size of the population of India will still give rise to, millions of Hijra people. And so there are enough there that they then can become a force under their own, so to speak. And so they're a third sex, a third gender. And so the Indian passport has for some time had a third gender marker for Hijra. So they're accepted, but they have a specialized role, and so they would have a minority role, and so they would deal with minority issues in jobs and employment and housing. Like, would you rent to a Hijra? This sort of thing. Would you hire a Hijra? Would come up there. And so when you do get a Hijra mayor of a town, that winds up being an article in the newspaper, wow, look at this. But in Polynesia, as you say, it does seem to be completely normal, nothing extraordinary about it. And there, of course, there's no gender reassignment surgery needed. So I remember the first time I was actually in Tahiti, and here was a chorus of women singers, and there was somebody there who looked quite obviously male. She, I guess, was just part of the women's chorus. And I was really taken by that. It was the first time I had appreciated that. And then, of course, and that was long before I wrote Evolution's Rainbow, maybe 5 or 10 years, five years before that. And then I really got into it. But as I think I mentioned in the past, I've been surprised at how much diversity was. I remember when I started Evolution's Rainbow, I thought I was going to wind up writing a small pamphlet. And because I had heard of a few species where there was sex change, there was some fish, which changed. And the fish changed sex, not gender. They switch from making eggs to making sperm, or vice versa, as distinct from what goes on with mammals, which would all be gender change because no one has switched from making eggs to making sperm. However, in invertebrates, that's definitely possible, and that certainly occurs in fish. I think about 50% of the coral reef fish are species in which there is sex change. So if you go snorkeling in a coral reef, you're seeing a whole lot of species there that are like parrotfish, common fish, wrasses, so forth. Nothing really obscure. So I was surprised as I got into the literature at how voluminous the literature was, and that's why, as you know, Evolution's Rainbow turned out to be nice and thick. I really feel that there's the stuff of a wonderful thesis. If someone were to if we go back over here to this list and expand this list and do a compare and contrast on here, but it would have to be, this would be really out of the mainstream of anthropological thinking, and which is pretty binarist on the whole, and then so it'd be sort of like a thesis that was joint gender studies and anthropology, which would put together something here. It would make a fabulous thesis or a set of them. Anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah.